So welcome, good evening, bonsoir. I am Mirko Zardini, I am the director of the Canadian Centre for Architecture, and it is really a pleasure to have here tonight Robert Mangurian and Marianne Ray. Robert and Marianne, they are the partner, the principal in Studio Works, an office in Los Angeles and New York, and now operating also in Beijing. And the Robert Mangurian and Marianne Ray, they are the recipient of the 2008 and 9 James Sterling Memorial Lectures on the City, which is a competition for a lecture on urban issues, which the CCA is doing every 2 years in association with the London School of Economics. So after this lecture, there will be in the next fall a presentation of this ongoing process of research also at the London School of Economics in the fall 2009. And this is the third of these lectures. The first two were they saw here at CCA Teddy Cruz in 2004 and A.L. Weissman in 2006. And tonight they are going to present their work, very, very interesting, on Beijing. It will be a new way to look at the history and transformation of the city, also taking into account a period of time which generally we do not consider, which is the period during kind of the communist planning strategy that and the planification in that period, which is quite interesting to look at today. Robert Mangurian, he's an architect. He studied at Berkeley, at Stanford University. He founded in 1969, if I'm correct, Studio Works, together with Kate Goddard, Craig Hodgetts, and Lester Walker. And he has been teaching and working in so many places. And I think that we have to recognize that both Marianne and Robert, they have really influenced our thinking of architecture and our thinking of the urban problems through their works along the last 20 years. Their works with their specific projects, their buildings, and their teaching and their research from Princeton University to Tulane, USLA, Washington, Harvard, GSD, Rice, Michigan. Both of them, they have been in Rome at the Academy, and both of them now they are working in Beijing. Marianne has a master from Princeton University. She has been working with Michael Graves, James Turrell, and Richard Mayer, among others. And she has been teaching at Yale, at Rice, and the Otis College of Art and Design in Los Angeles, and also at the University of Michigan. And I would like to end with the incredible work that they did at SciArc. In Los Angeles, they really contributed to shape one of the most interesting periods in the research and thinking of architecture, when SciArc was really one of the most important and interesting laboratory in the field of architectural theory and practice. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much, Robert and Marianne. Please join me in welcoming them to the CCA. Thank you again.
Okay. So bonsoir, good evening, and wang shang hao. Fortunately or unfortunately, the entire talk will not be trilingual. We'll speak in English. It's such an honor to be here this evening. The CCA has always been for us such a treasure for architecture, such a special and rare place. Really one of the very few places where a kind of dialogue and exchange about architecture can happen. And somehow for us it manages to be really solid, but at the same time quite dynamic too. I think not easy to achieve. We want to thank Phyllis Lambert for the genius of CCA as this gift to architecture, to Mirko Zardini, who's been always such a great inspiration for our work. Sometimes we've had the great pleasure of collaborating with you on work. Giovanna Barassi, also an inspiration. Sophie LaFrance, thank you. The London School of Economics and the Sterling jury for giving us this amazing opportunity. So we'll really appreciate your comments and reactions to this work that we'll show and talk about tonight. As Mirko said, the next talk is a year away, and that's a kind of luxury, I think, for us to develop the work and bring in a kind of bigger dialogue of people into it. So we do anticipate advancements and improvements and reconsiderations of this work, and a dynamic and changing work, just like the urbanism that we're going to see tonight. So, Beijing Inside Out, Heads and Tails of Two Villages, Caochangdi and Shangshuiguo.
First, a strange story that establishes our presence in an urban village within Beijing, Caochangdi. In late fall of 2002, we received a phone call from our friend Drew Hammond, who we knew through one of our intellectual underpinnings, Pellegrino di Cerno, asking us to immediately come to Beijing to work with his Scottish friend Bernard Webb, a kind of rogue Scottish aristocrat, who was hooked up with a Shanghai gang running things then in China, to introduce steel construction and design endless numbers of very tall buildings. That was how it was stated. We begged off with Bernard and said, look, Bernard, 3 stories was the highest that we've gone so far, and you really should phone SOM. After a meeting with Bernard in Rome, another strange story, by chance a few weeks later, we were convinced to develop a team to meet this challenge. We ended up in Beijing in early February 2003, just before SARS, and went and spent the next 2 years on and off dealing with steel construction and other things architectural. On our first trip, Bernard's other, Morgan, who was involved in art, the early stages of China art, took us to a mysterious, at that time, just emerging art place, 798. And seeing its late 1950s East German Bauhaus factory buildings sealed the deal for us. We were hooked by this, and by being in a city developing much like it must have been in Chicago in the late 1800s, and being in a place where architecture and city making was the #1 activity in the country, which it still is. We fought for 2 years to secure some of this concrete vaulted space, the signature of the now famous 798's Arts District, and finally secured about 7,000 square meters of prime space with the Ministry of Construction's, as partners with the Ministry of Construction's prestigious China Academy of Building Research and Beijing Urban Construction Group, the construction company that gave China and Beijing the Herzog-Demeron Bird's Nest, the Foster Capital Airport, the Anzhu Titanium Egg, the subway system, et cetera, et cetera. These were both partners in base Beijing. Beijing, what stands for Beijing Architecture Studio Enterprise. Our ambitions were to become a place for the public to become involved in architecture and city making, and a place of time out for the normal sort of architectural studies within the schools of architecture. I'll tell you, it was such a struggle to get the space. We had it for 4 months, and then it ended. It's a story too long to describe, but a hint of this was when the central government, 2 weeks before we lost our Factory 706 space, announced nationally that the Forbidden City, the Olympic architectures, the Great Wall, and, a shocking thing, 798, the Arts District, were the Olympic Gang of Four tourist attractions, so that you can fill in the blanks from there of why we lost the space.
Mm-hmm. So 3 days before we had 35 students arriving from 2 North American universities, before they were coming, we found ourselves with no space at all for them, for us. So we pulled out all the stops and ended up in a very raw space filled with Gobi desert sand, no electricity, no phone, no internet, no water, no furniture or doors. It was across the street from our friend Ai Weiwei in what was then the backwater of the 798 Arts District. It was called Caochangdi. It's a small urban village, and it was undergoing at that time something of a transformation. Then in 3 days, we had all of the necessary amenities in place, a testimony to the possibilities of getting things done that exist in China today, and especially in a kind of urban village like Caochangdi. Part 1, Caochangdi, farmers, floaters, taxi drivers, artists, and the international art mob challenge and remake the city.
This first story is close to us. We are literally living the story of Caochangdi and participating in its growth and change, and existing very much as illegal residents. Yes, the police station registers us when we were there, but only as temporary residents. Our constructions are illegal, and the setup for base Beijing is, for the most part, illegal. Therefore, we're very much like most of the residents in Caochangdi, which are what's called the floating population, or illegal residents.
Yeah. So in a pocket defined by the intersection of the massive Fifth Ring Road, which was the edge of Beijing when it was finished in 2002, now much more inside the city, the intersection of that and the airport expressway that took visitors to the city of Beijing and to the One World, One Dream Olympic venues this August, sits the urban village of Caochangdi. The village is in the Chaozhong district of Beijing, which is by far the largest revenue-producing district in all of China. It accounts for 2.5% of the entire GDP of the country. So it forms this strange kind of conundrum to have a village inside of this. Caochangdi is a thriving early 21st century space of mostly illegal structures being built by entrepreneurial farmers and by contemporary art dealers and artists. It's very much, as we'll see, not like the large-scale plan developments that characterize much of Beijing and other cities worldwide as they're in the process of forming. It's one of nearly 500 or more urban villages that are nestled within Beijing. And these urban villages are often raising unique city-making voices of their own.
What has been fulfilling for us as we live and work in Caochangdi is that Caochangdi has acted as a lens for seeing many of the extreme conditions occurring in early 21st century China, occurring in real space and time and in a setting of what at first seemed to us to be a kind of non-place. The Caochangdi phenomena turns out to be more prevalent than we originally thought. These extreme conditions manifesting themselves in daily life and through spatial practices in Caochangdi are economic, social, environmental, and political. They are repeated in nearly 500 other illegal urban villages in Beijing. That's 500. And perhaps, well, not perhaps, no doubt, hundreds-fold throughout China's cities. This is because the people that, partly because of the people that do most of the growing work in Beijing, and I'll have to say the grunt work, are the floating population, the illegal immigrants. And some of these people, not all, some of these people live in these what's called the urban villages of the cities.
So clearly, Robert Neuwirth's book, if you know his book, Shadow Cities, A Billion Squatters, A New Urban World, points out that this phenomena is a kind of massive but silent force in cities forming and reforming themselves. He and others state that by 2050, there will be 3 billion squatter city dwellers, more than 1/3 of the world's population living at the edge. Beijing and Caochangdi have their own unique form of squatting, which is quite unlike some of the ones he describes, but nevertheless very parallel to them. Living and occupying these illegal structures in unplanned parts of the city. They're under the radar, but we started to see that perhaps they might contain the DNA for creative and unexpected new forms of city making. So Caochangdi tells a kind of specific story about its between 4,000 and 7,000, mostly illegal residents. But it also has embedded within it problems and possibilities of urban space as they occur in this really unique time in human history. This is the first time ever, because of rural to urban migrations, that half of us are living in cities and half of us are living in the countryside. We've just reached that tipping point. And this shift from the rural to the city has been the greatest factor in city making and city revision in the past 100 years worldwide. Clearly, cities are seen as the place to be economically, but are they the place to be socially, spatially, and environmentally? And we'll discuss this in part 2 when we look at a rural village. Watching Caochangdi over the course of the past 2.5 years has been like looking at a mad fast-forward video, revealing not only the mechanisms of urban change in early 21st century Asia, but also the human and spatial consequences of this change, since we've been able to rub up against it so closely.
Caochangdi's recent development is spontaneous and, again, seemingly under the radar of the planning authorities. This spontaneous behavior is, in fact, a kind of experimental urban development and could be seen as extremely healthy for the larger city, and perhaps, as we will see later, for the even larger project of the new socialist village, which is the rural village.
And now we'll move into some of these specific conditions. But first, a note on our sources of information, which are, we might say, sometimes from the top down, sometimes from the bottom up, sometimes from left fields, and sometimes from more usual suspects. Since books on contemporary China are often outdated even before they're printed, much of our research and references tend to come from primary or first-hand sources and observations, interviews, but also from journalism. And we will be quoting tonight from Chairman Mao Zedong, from Hu Jintao, President of China and Time Magazine's Man of the Year of 2007, Michel de Certeau, Ai Weiwei, China's premier contemporary artist, who's also a Caochangdi resident, our neighbor across the street. He also was co-designer of the stadium with Herzog and de Meuron. I will quote from a real estate lawyer, from elected village leaders, since democracy is at play in the villages these days, a pancake vendor, and a member of the floating population, a rural to urban migrant working as a cook for a sewer construction crew.
China Rupture Urbanism, a chronology of Caochangdi.
So OMA has copyrighted the term Shenzhen Speed. But Pili, one of China's top curators of contemporary art in China, and another of our neighbors in Caochangdi now, has described this in a different way, this speed of construction. Pili says that the Asian planning model is a kind of unplanned urbanism that grows like grass. He also described Asian urbanization as being like an emergency zone cake batter, pizza, or a baozi dumpling. And this is rather humorous, actually, since one of the nicknames for Beijing is the big baozi, or big dumpling. So in her master's thesis at Peking University, Hu Huishuan developed an idea about Beijing that she called Rupture Urbanism. And it was quite convincing to us. Her thesis deals primarily with 20th century Beijing, and she describes the fairly major political and spatial ruptures that have had an impact on the formation of the city. But in fact, this kind of rupture is not something new for Beijing. From dynasty to dynasty, things like cultural revolutions almost took place, where the location of the city, the name of the city through history, the shape of the city changed quite distinctly. And one of China's extreme conditions that Caochangdi has given us a very direct and particular look into is this urbanism of change, of the unfinished, of the city in the process of becoming. So in human history, the land of Caochangdi began as an unoccupied grazing land and was used by the imperial court as a hunting ground. Then it was determined that the site had excellent feng shui, and the imperial family began to use it for burial sites and build associated kind of amazing gardens equal to the summer palace. And then what's called a Zuransun, or a natural village, sprung up, really from the ground up. It was built and occupied by two extended families, the Sun and the Zhang families. And the villagers serviced the tombs. They stepped in to fill a need to cater to the imperial family members as they visited their ancestors' graves.
During the Cultural Revolution, under Mao's orders, the imperial gardens were demolished, and the village became an agricultural people's commune. The villagers' work changed from manicuring imperial gardens to planting and harvesting crops. At that time, as part of the
Shangshan Xiaxiang campaign,
when young people and urban educated adults were sent up to the mountains and down to the countryside, Caochangdi was considered remote from Beijing. And even as late as 2003, to us, Caochangdi seemed out of it. When Ai Weiwei, when we were fighting for the 798 space, Ai Weiwei told us, well, you should just find a place here. And we said, geez, nobody's going to come out here. It's just too far out, even though it was not very far away. It just seemed very remote. And at that time, also 798 was still off the map of most of the taxi drivers. That situation has very much changed today.
So it's sort of interesting to note that this up to the mountains, down to the countryside campaign was a kind of forced migration from urban to rural. And this was kind of a reversal of the current, more natural migration of the rural to urban migrations.
The evidence of these earlier eras still linger in the village. Here is a
urban shepherd roaming the streets of the capital city of China.
And perhaps provokes a desire for diversity, in this case diversity through time, to remain alive in a place, living actually and not through the projections carried by buildings and stories carried by books.
When Deng Xiaoping opened the economy of China to the global market, private companies started to then move into the village, replacing some of the people's commune activity and architecture. And they built these factories and large sheds. These are just samples of aerials, and you may see that in the video, the two kinds of landscapes in the village, one of these and the other of what you're looking at right there, these dayuan. And because of the need for more real estate, the farmlands did diminish to build them. This land, whether farm or private compound or village, as in the case with all the land in China, is not privatized, but it belongs to the government. And this produces a kind of space under the influence of a hybrid experiment that's part capitalist, part communist, and part socialist. If we jump ahead in time, we'll see that these dayuan, or sheds, are now being occupied by studios and cultural and art venues. And in fact, our base space is in one of these large sheds.
Yeah, the shed that we're in was actually formerly a fish farm under the thing itself. What produces a kind of strange urban conundrum and sets Caochangdi apart from the 300 or so other, in fact, now it's we found
closer to 500.
Closer to 500 urban villages in Beijing, is that since the beginning of the 21st century, it has become a locus for art production and international galleries. Vanity Fair reported that at a recent auction, Sotheby's and Christie's sold $63 million worth of contemporary Chinese art. A fair amount of this art is connected to 798 and Caochangdi. The Caochangdi is the village that's described as one of the newest cool places in the world, along with Harlem, Brighton, and Valencia.
Yeah.
In an attempt to capitalize upon the natural growth of the arts in Caochangdi, the Chinese Central Party has given the village leaders the mandate to bring the economy of the village by the year 2009 up to one supported by at least 70% art and cultural enterprises. The 11th five-year plan, which was announced while we still were involved with the 798 space, has one of its primary agendas the goal of fostering invention in China through the development of cultural and creative industries.
Right, and Caochangdi has been slated as one of the socialist new countryside villages, even though it's smack dab in the middle of the city. And there are slogan banners all around the village that actually talk about developing the cultural aspects of the village. And while anything's possible, it actually appears that most the mostly illegal structures of the village are not slated for demolition, as they are in some villages. In fact, during the summer of 2007, as part of this initiative of building the socialist new countryside, many improvements were made in the village. A lot of infrastructure went in, separated storm and sanitary sewers, as we're seeing here, and other things. So apparently, in some sense, the government realizes the value of this self-made cultural zone and is now investing in it and, to some extent, co-opting it.
Village in the city, Chaozhong, the other invisible Beijing, home to 1 of every 10 Beijingers.
So as we said, Caochangdi, one of nearly 500 urban villages or villages in the city in Beijing. An estimated 1.5 million people, or 1 in every 10 Beijingers, lives in this kind of urban atmosphere, similar to the one we're looking at tonight. It's obviously a Beijing that was not seen during the Olympics, but is incredibly prevalent. They're literally cities within themselves, strewn within the larger city. Some residents call them the forgotten corners of the city, saying, "No one takes care of us, no one sees us."
In his text, City of Objects, aka City of Desire, Young-Ho Chang talks about the horizontal courtyard city that was the Beijing he grew up in. He then goes on to say, however, a revolution to sabotage this urban and architectural coherence and to develop singularity as well as verticality was to unfold. The OB, or object building, came into existence. Young-Ho describes the definition of the OB as detached from and often contrasting with its surroundings. A typical OB is freestanding, figural, sculptural, and formally unique in terms of geometry, material, and color. The once uniform landscape of Beijing is now a metropolitan field that is inundated with skyscrapers and individually expressive architectures with a disorganized and damaged fabric, or simply without. As for how this OB city is produced, Young-Ho describes the myriad of planning codes, including daylight distance, back to Gropius, FARs, building and greenery coverage, and setbacks.
In this aerial view of new developments just to the east of Beijing, shows these setbacks. Google caught it at the moment where the sun shines. You can see the planning setbacks just allow it not to shade the other building. But you can see also the kind of inefficient land use both in those towers as well as in the center part where you see a more suburban type villa deal. Okay, and there's a view of those object buildings and this kind of vast slurry of space between them, the damaged fabric that Young-Ho talks about. And then these suburban villas, which actually are slated for demolition now because of their inefficiency and their failure economically. In fact, partially due to the inefficiency, but also because, as it turns out, a lot of Chinese people actually don't like living in suburban space, but would rather live in a kind of denser urban setting.
Again, Young-Ho says that there can be no other possibilities but a city of objects because of the codes, etc. Therefore, the city of objects is envisioned as intentioned and deliberately planned. But there places like we found, places like these urban villages are maybe a kind of model for a change to that dictate.
Wang Shi is the founder and chairman of China Vanke Company, which is the largest housing developer in China. He began as a poor migrant worker and did a stint in the People's Liberation Army. But now he's one of China's new billionaires, which indicates to us that some kind of version of what the American dream was is actually alive in the new China. Wang Shi is the oldest person to have scaled the highest peaks on 7 continents. This was in the New York Times Magazine, if some of you caught this article. So this means he's trekked to the 2 poles and the 7 continents, a feat known as 7+2. But even with this new tycoon lifestyle that he lives, to some extent he hasn't really disowned his roots. He's a rather enlightened developer in some ways. His goal, above and beyond the profit margin, is to help people at any point on the economic ladder in China today to buy and own a house. And this has been extremely successful economically, especially at this time in China when there is a kind of upward mobility possible and happening on the ladder. But as Beijing and other real estate markets are starting to burst their bubbles, Wangshe and Vanke have started to develop a new form of housing that actually opens up a whole new customer group as homeowners. Vanke calls their new mini housing, and these are houses that are under 60 square meters. They're called yiju, or ant's nest housing. And so this is going to be a new experiment in density. It'll probably be housed in landscapes like those obi landscapes in towers, but within that a kind of new density that will be experimented with. The density, in fact, will equal about what Caochangdi is doing right now with a much lower profile but closer together fabric. Simultaneity without the collapse of difference. Heterotopic delirium. Martha Stewart visits the village.
The Caochangdi arthood / village is just the beginning of a rather wild mix that forms a heterotopic extraordinaire. This traditional village fabric sits in the midst of a landscape of ring roads, expressways, train tracks, mid-rise housing, suburban villas, factories, high-end industrial galleries, and art studios and agriculture. And yes, Martha Stewart has paid a visit to the village.
An alphabetical catalog of the buildings in Caochangdi reveals a kind of this wild mix of programs, as seen in the map here, that range from a dog meat restaurant, a Korean Christian church operating under the cover of an animation training school, which we shared a party wall with, so we knew that quite well, a blue-chip art gallery based in Lucerne and Beijing, a Belgian Foundation for Cancer Diagnosis and Cure, the house and studio of Ai Weiwei and fake design, something called Iowa, which is a compound of Quonset huts transformed into an American suburban-style home with a Mongolian corn-fed restaurant as a part of it, housing for taxi drivers, and a driving school boasting simulated freeway on and off ramps for the new drivers of China. And on the street of Caochangdi, you literally, and we didn't catch the photograph of it, you can literally catch a mule cart going by a Bentley. And if we can dissect this photograph and sort of zoom into some parts of it, this street scene, you can see this mix of original village structures, of new multi-story buildings built by farmers over there, an impromptu market, a construction site, a temporary street cafe, and in the backdrop here is one of the kind of minimalist new designed by Ai Weiwei Swiss gallery, Erstmeiler.
A selected inventory of goods and services sold in Caochangdi by its micro and macro entrepreneurs reveals a hetero-economic nature of the place. It reveals a range from 7 cents for basic bread, $2 or $3 for feeding 15 or 20 of our students for an evening, to $5 million art, and to unknown millions for cancer-curing nuclear medicine equipment.
A catalog of the kind of heterotopia of the widths of the streets and ways in Caochangdi reveals another kind of wild range that goes between 0.71 meters all the way up to 41.15 meters with the Fifth Ring Road and expressways. This is an increase of 1 to 60-fold. And you can see this sharp contrast here.
Another experiment in Beijing, in fact, one of the few, other than these sort of large-scale developments of housing
like we saw in the aerial.
or office, is this heterotopic city that was consciously planned.
Yeah, an attempt to produce a consciously planned heterotopia in this thing called Soho.
Soho, or small office, home office. The developers are Zhang Xin and Pan Qi of the Soho Development Group, featured in a New Yorker article a few years ago. We have much respect for these two and for their work and the support of good architecture, certainly. But there is a critique of the project. Zhang and Pan envisioned a mix of tenants, which is incredibly radical, in fact, which is the normal situation in Caochangdi, a mix of tenants that would use the neutral spaces within the buildings
loft-like neutral spaces
in different ways, as houses, home offices, small businesses, or design and art studios. The problem was, it turned out that no one wanted to live next to what potentially might be something like a massage parlor or a noodle stand. So nearly all of the spaces have been taken as office space.
Right.
This attempt to produce a new heterotopic city does not have the street life or nightlife they had hoped for, since no one goes there at night.
And no one lives there.
Map Office, based in Hong Kong, has made a stunning video of Soho called The City of Consumption. They depict the landscape inside Soho as devoid of humans, except for a smattering of cleaning people who work around the clock to keep the place clean, which is entirely white.
A place which is entirely
clean.
white, clean.
Floating populations and chain migrations, blind flowers, hooligans, and art slackers.
So it's difficult to find really hard statistics, but the floating population, that is these rural to urban migrators, add an estimated invisible 25% to that population of Beijing, which is officially listed as 18 million. Li Zhang has written that the floating population is often represented by media and official discourse as an aimless, intractable, and menacing peril unleashed by the invisible hand of the free market. Yet without them, the Beijing Olympics and most things in China would never have happened. This is a lexicon revealing the different kinds of floaters. We're actually developing an even larger version of this lexicon. But the floaters are known as taking the 3D jobs, that is, the dirty, the dangerous, and the difficult. This was a scene we came upon and had to kind of squint and look several times, realizing these were not birds on the wires. These are high-tension workers perched in space with nothing but a sort of belt in their body, making repairs just along the south border on one of the large roads, the south border of Caochangdi village this past summer.
Xiao Liu is a builder who runs his own business with a workforce of about 35 people near Caochangdi. Xiao Liu did the work in renovating our space, and I got to know him and his workers quite closely. He and his workers are called in China non-Minggong, or farmer workers. This is a mapping of the chain migration that he provoked, that includes his family, friends, and fellow villagers. This is the common mode throughout China. In the cities, the floaters are everywhere, but they are invisible. The floaters and their sites of production are screened from view by huge green screen polypropylene nets. Every once in a while, they leak into the street and into public view, especially at Chinese New Year's, when you see them with their belongings packed in a bag, and along with their year's earnings, they head home to the village for 1 month with their families.
In fact, they're only paid once a year because that's the only reason they want the money, is because it's to take back to their family. We're going to pass about 3 or 4 things around the audience so that you're not only looking at sort of virtual things, but you can touch some things. This is a typical issue workers bag, and the text on it says, "Produce safely," a little bit like our "safety first," a reminder to the workers. So architects building in China actually don't seem to pay too much attention to these actual producers of architecture that leak out of the sites every once in a while. They work 12-hour shifts, night or day. Contemporary Chinese artists, though, have paid some attention to them and have found ways of making the floaters and their conditions visible to us in new ways. Here, Ai Weiwei constructs a star, a kind of official image of China, but he does it from 5 standard issue workers' raincoats, which is, here is one of them. We won't pass it around, but you sort of hear its quality here. Then with the same raincoat, Weiwei makes a modified ready-made with the addition of a condom. There's a reference to the high rate of AIDS that's spreading through the mostly male construction floating population. So this coat serves as a kind of multitasking wet gear, offering an overall protection.
And this work in the year 2002, and at first had just 7 or 8 workers. He now has 30 to 40 workers. Xiao Liu is described by his patrons as having 3 heads and 6 arms, which is a Chinese way of saying he is a very capable person. He's also nicknamed XL because even though he is short, he is an extra large man. Xiao Liu has been very successful. He is so successful that he says he wishes he had a photocopy machine so that he could make a copy of himself. he is now a leaseholder of illegal land and also a landlord. It is even rumored by some that he has become a millionaire in yuan, but still that's a lot of money. He is thinking about planning a trip to Europe with his family to look at buildings. He has become very interested in architecture and construction.
Some of us has rubbed off on him a little there, I think. The following conversation is one of many interviews that we've done with people now living and working in Caochangdi. And for us, their words have really revealed some of the very real conditions at play. Mr. Hu is a floater engaged in the construction trade. So question.
So how long have you worked here in Caochangdi?
I've been here for 1 month since the construction started.
What do you do in the team?
I make 3 meals every day for the workers. I'm a cook.
How many workers are in your team?
About 20.
What do you think about their work?
This is hard work, really hard. There is no easy work for us. We are labor workers.
What are your is your daily schedule?
I get up at 4 a.m. and make breakfast. Then the workers are on duty at 6:30 a.m. Lunch is at 12 noon. Then we all have a rest until about 1:30 in the afternoon. Dinner time is at 7 p.m.
How many teams are here in the village now for the new Socialist Village project?
3 teams at least. We're doing the sewer pipes, and the other teams are doing the gas and water pipes, water and gas pipes.
How much is spent on each worker every day for food?
About 5 yuan or 70 cents per person every day.
How long is the project going to take?
At least 1 more month.
What are you going to do after the construction?
This is my first time in Beijing. I want to go to Tiananmen Square and have a look. It's not easy to come to Beijing.
What do you think about this village and about your home village?
There are no fields in Caochangdi. You can't see the fields at all here anymore. The people in my hometown do farm work and make money from food, but the people here spend money to buy food. Art chain migration.
Oops. In the early 21st century, artist Ai Weiwei moved to Caochangdi and built a compound of illegal structures to serve as a house and studio. He provoked a chain migration that produced an influx of other artists and galleries. At this time, of over 65 registered companies in the village, 40 are cultural industries, and all of this was provoked by Ai Weiwei. This is a map that we produced that locates all of the cultural venues in Caochangdi. And this is a mapping of the art chain migration to Caochangdi from all over the world. Many of the galleries have been opened by Europeans. This has brought with it the sleek Mercedes and Audis, designer-clad art patrons, the exhibitions of really stunning art. This coexists with the rough-and-tumble village described earlier.
Beipiao is a particular kind of floater, and it often refers to young people who drift north to Beijing from the south, lured by this artistic and cultural climate. And they become sometimes what's known as arty slackers, slacker-offers, or sometimes they work quite energetically to try to make it and become something in this cultural media and entertainment industries in the city. There's a vast migration of actually rural to urban or urban to Beijing by art students. Vast amounts of them stream into the city and set up studios.
Reverse migrations, pre-Tiananmen, post-9/11, the turtles.
So in parallel to Teddy Cruz's description of the reverse migrations back to Mexico from the US, Caochangdi and China have seen this in another kind of way. So pre-1989, that is pre-Tiananmen, many Chinese artists left for the US and they set up studios or taught or studied art. Perhaps they smelled a rat coming, and we think they did. Post-9/11 times have seen now a reverse migration where a lot of them have moved back to China, especially to Beijing, and also of artists and art dealers, both Chinese and from abroad. Haigui is the word for turtle in Mandarin, and it can be used to refer to a Chinese person that has gone abroad for some time and then returns and sort of crawls up onto the shore. And we're definitely seeing these reverse migrations of the turtles.
Mr. Hu, referred to earlier, is one of the village's reverse migrators or turtles. He fled Beijing with his family after the revolution, since his father was the head of one of the mayors of Beijing. He eventually made his way to the US and became, after his studies, at Kent State, became a theoretical professor of theoretical mathematics at the University of Iowa. Retired now, he is back in his hometown of Beijing, as he wanted to reconnect with his past and to have his daughter grow up in China. Mr. Hu leased a piece of land from the Caochangdi villagers and built a complex of Quonset huts. At that time, he was afraid because it was all illegal, and the only legal structures you could build on this farmland were farm structures. So
like
he built these
greenhouses.
Quonset huts,
Right.
and he named it Iowa. The various Quonset huts are home to a suburban American-style house, a swimming pool, greenhouses, a bar, a hotel, and a restaurant serving Iowa food.
Including that Mongolian corn-fed beef, which he sort of got going.
In one of the Quonset huts is parked a Cadillac that reverse migrated with him. In the Iowa complex, Mr. Hu also built a miniature golf course with Chinese characteristics.
DGU, Dispersal Group Unit Urbanism, Checkerboard Agro-Urbanism, Forest of Smokestacks, the Beijing Plan of 1959. Chairman Mao was a radical urban designer. Mao chose his words carefully as he faced 500,000 people in Tiananmen Square. He waved his hand and proclaimed his vision for seeing the city covered with a forest of smokestacks. This vision is related to an urban plan made for Beijing in 1959. And the famous Chinese urban planner, Liang Tzucheng, was involved with the design of this along with a team of Chinese and Russian planners. But it's said that Chairman Mao was the primary influence on this plan. And it was called Dispersal Group Unit Urbanism. And it turns out to be quite a radical proposal for a city. It did involve forests and smokestacks. It's a proposal for a producer city as opposed to a consumer city, a Shengchang Chengxi as opposed to a Shaofei Chengxi.
And we think it has a funny relationship to coming after Frank Lloyd Wright's Broadacre City.
And here's the plan, the 1959 plan.
Notes on the 1959 plan. Guideline. To serve the need of the future Republican era, city construction should serve the goal of establishing an industrialized capital city, an industrialized commune, an industrialized agriculture. Principle 2, city layout. By adopting a dispersal group type, especially for the industrial layout, balance should be achieved by having reasonable unity within the group and including industries and agriculture within each group. Land between the groups should be filled with vegetable gardens, farmland, and forest, forming towns and residential areas of different sizes around the urban area.
So that they basically were these pockets of dozens of tripartite compounds that had the agriculture, the factory, and the commune living.
Principle 3, industrial development. Control urban areas, develop rural areas. Principle 4, organization of residential areas. The construction of new residential areas should strictly follow the principle of the People's Commune. This urbanization of agriculture, factory, and village is one of natural and artificial production activated by human energy. It is an urbanism that puts the countryside in the city, predating but anticipating, as we will see later, the new socialist village. Principle 5, or a kind of summary, historical status. This plan was established under these special circumstances, the Great Leap Forward and the People's Commune movement. But the plan was never officially adopted. However, it was in practice and has affected the way Beijing looks today.
And we've been looking for that Beijing. This fall, our students have been scouring Beijing, identifying and cataloging all of the urban villages. We had read that there were an estimated 300 urban villages in the city, and that 120 of these were slated to be demolished before the Olympics. But when we took an actual count, we found closer to 500 villages. And what was interesting is that the urban village, when we found these things, they actually were these conglomerates of the village, or the kind of commune architecture, and then the factories, which are the blue shed roofs, and agriculture. And so really this other Beijing is a realization in some ways of that 1959 Chairman Mao radical plan. And there was a typology of these villages that emerged as we looked at them. Classic one that we just saw in the previous slide and you see here, the tripartite one. Then sometimes it'll be a village with a lot of agriculture, or a village with a lot of factory, or a mushrooming village. This is Caochangdi zoomed in, where entrepreneurial farmers are adding 3 to 5 stories, so it's sort of blossoming on itself. And then there were villages with all sorts of strange anomalies. This one has slab housing units sort of plopped down in the middle of it, or this one with a freeway interchange, or this one with an airport runway. And then finally, the dismantled or dismantling villages.
As an additional mandate of the 1959 plan, Mao Zedong specifically raised the issue of keeping 40% green land in urban areas and 60% in rural areas. This is not a surprise since we know of Mao's attachment to the soil and his reverence for peasant simplicity and earthiness.
And in fact, we've sort of been reading about how Mao had a kind of instinctive mistrust of Soviet versions of building a new socialist society. In the Soviet version of this, they were very urban, city-centered versions of this. The Great Leap Forward, on the other hand, was, as all the propaganda shows us, was distinctly anti-urban. Illegal, illegitimate urbanism, fake or interior real estate. Architecture produces a new Chinese middle class. Build illegal mess, especially in public street.
All of my buildings in the village are illegal. A quote from Ai Weiwei speaking about the projects by Fake, his design company in Chaozhong village. In country C, Caochangdi, practically everything is illegal, not having official documentation, identification, employment, proof of residency, having more than one child, worshipping freely, etc. This map of Caochangdi, based on the government document that shows illegal constructions in black and legal ones in gray. Clearly, most of the village is acknowledged as being illegal.
Hu Da Luanjian is a Chinese saying that roughly means to build an illegal mess, especially in the public street. The streets inside Caochangdi village are usually filled with the activity of life and work and play. And sometimes vehicles use the street, but it's usually a kind of secondary or afterthought sort of thing. Micro-entrepreneurs set up their stands, restaurants, they do business. The builders use their street to store building materials and stage their construction. The street really is, after all, public. The streets of Caochangdi are not named. The village is like a kind of undifferentiated field of a numerical field with addresses simply being some number between 1 and 331. And these are sometimes assigned spatially, but more often they're just applied in order in time as a new address becomes necessary. So navigating, getting a DHL package is not easy in the village. The cell phone is the indispensable apparatus of wayfinding here. In an effort to turn Caochangdi into a more real space, the village leaders, as part of their mandate to build this new socialist village, plan to legitimize and name the streets next year. They're considering naming the streets after famous artists because of the village's recent prominence as this thriving arts district. But they're unsure whether they should use the names of European artists or of Chinese artists or some sort of combination of the two.
We've been advocating that our street, where we have the base studio across the street from Ai Weiwei's house and studio, be named Ai Weiwei.
Zurangsun is a Chinese term that means natural village, or a village that sprang up and grew of its own accord, as we described that Caochangdi was, as opposed to an administrative village, which is one that's planned and implanted from above. The first settlers of Caochangdi really set in motion this idea of a natural village and of a kind of natural growth that really continues to this day.
One of the beauties of the recent developments in Caochangdi for us is that it has been spontaneous and illegal. It is a kind of people's architecture. To think of that the planning authorities are not aware of this is naive. Of course, clearly the authorities are looking the other way in order to accommodate life and small-scale development without time-consuming planning and the subsequent large-scale development required to support it. In fact, the Central Party appears to be knowingly and brilliantly, in some ways, allowing this petri dish of Caochangdi to incubate on its own. Our research shows at Caochangdi and other illegal villages in Beijing to observe and document these experiments as alternatives to the in-place strategy of large-scale developments. This has larger implications for the development of pre-existing cities and might imply that such certain zones that could be free from normal constraints of planning and zoning restrictions, which curtail creative experimental development, might greatly contribute towards producing new forms of urbanism. And again, we're setting this in the context not of just Beijing or of the cities of China, but a great deal of the world, where a third of many cities are, in fact, these migrant workers or illegal immigrants needing the same kinds of support structures, housing, et cetera, that the legal residents need.
And for us, this kind of incremental urbanism produced by the invested dwellers themselves forms the kind of city that Jane Jacobs describes as one that learns from cumulative wisdom and is fast on its feet and can adapt at a moment's notice. Canine globalism and the new leisure.
To enhance their entrepreneurship, the farmers of Caochangdi and other villages become landlords by renting out parts of their houses or by building larger, usually 3 to 5 story illegal buildings where their one-story house stood. This phenomenon of new, self-built, illegal, multi-story structures is a phenomenon of the past 2 to 3 years in Caochangdi, and it has given rise to a middle class. While few options for investment exist in China, one of the most successful is acquiring, enhancing, and profiting from what we call interior real estate by becoming landlords.
Sort of interior fake real estate. And actually, as a way to weather the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the Chinese government did a really smart thing. They began to sell the homes, this kind of interior real estate, to the people. And our friend Bernard, who wrote the housing policy for China during Jiang Zemin's administration, described this as the largest real estate transaction in the history of humankind, yet it was so under the radar and stealth that the New York Times didn't even report upon it. There's one of those farmer multi-storied constructions. Liang Wei is an artist who set up with a computer in a construction elevator and played a repeating 1-hour video game for one 12-hour shift as workers came and went up and down. It was an insertion of this new kind of leisure that was brought about by being able to resell your real estate and become a landlord into the space of the rigorous labor, which is also a part of New China.
Beijing has about 660,000 registered dogs, and the figure has been growing by nearly 10,000 a month, according to the Municipal Public Security Bureau. Last year, the city introduced a one-family, one-dog policy, clearly paralleling the one-child policy, which is often ignored, and launched a nationwide program against unregistered dogs.
So now that these farmers have more time on their hands, they have time to have a dog, to pet the dog, to walk the dog. And the dogs of Caochangdi are from all over the world. It's a really international mix, just like the kind of cultural immigrants to the city. So you can see a Croatian Dalmatian, a Belgian Tuvaran Puggle, a Siberian Husky, a Swiss St. Bernard, on and on. Workaholic, 24/7 city, scenes and routines, lanterns, cinemas to the passerby.
While new leisure has appeared in the village, Caochangdi is also a workaholic stream city, operating 24/7 and producing various scenes and routines. Evidence of the 24/7 city is seen in the remains of a 6 a.m. full-course fish dinner and beer recently downed by a group of taxicab drivers just off shifts.
This is a project by one of our thesis students who filmed 1 hour in the morning looking down on the main square of Caochangdi, and then reprojected it, that morning image, at night for another hour. And it was kind of a slipped overlap of time and space that reflected these sort of changing 12-hour shifts of taxi cabs and construction workers. Inside out, to not knowing a friend from an enemy, or not being able to distinguish between your internal affairs and your external affairs. And you'll see versions of this all over the Caochangdi, a shopkeeper and his son taking a 6 a.m. nap after a very early morning errands behind the cash register before they get back onto their school and work for the day.
Quoting from a lecture that Li gave at BASE, before the 1990s in China, we did not have a notion of private space. or at least such a definition between public space and private space. Every space was public. You go to 798, the district in the formerly military Danwei, and you can still see this kind of format of collective buildings. It's like a hostel. You didn't have a toilet, you didn't have a kitchen, everybody had one bedroom, and we shared the kitchen, we shared the bathroom. This kind of new real estate thing has really changed lives. People started to have the private ownership of space. People started to have their own private spaces. That's the main thing. In the 1990s, it was a fantastic dream for a Chinese family to have their own apartment with one kitchen, a toilet, and 2 bedrooms. For Westerners, it is very hard to understand how this change can inform and translate daily life for the Chinese people. People have started to have public space and privacy, their own space to act in.
And this, I'm just going to jump over. There are quilts in the village that on a sunny day sort of pull out interiors and produce this kind of soft exterior that comes from the interior of the house.
Architectural production and reproduction, cycles of fake, fake, and double fake. Control C, Control V, and the culture of the copy.
So while China is criticized for its abuse of intellectual property rights and pirated goods, one of which we're going to send around the audience here, one can also look at...
If you steal it, it's only worth $12.
One can also look deeply into China's past and actually to try to understand, for instance, that in Taoist philosophy, things gain value each time they are reiterated. So each subsequent description of a text is more valuable than the previous. You know, the saying over and over of a chant gains in power, or a temple that's rebuilt on its site is more valuable than its predecessor. Even like a real antique meeting table can sell for a few $1,000s, but a really exquisite new copy can sell for tens of thousands of dollars. So I think we kind of have to reverse our kind of take on the fake and the double fake.
The culture of the copy is alive and well certainly in Caochangdi village. Fake's design studio, the name probably came about because Ai Weiwei and his brother, to earn money before he cashed in on the art thing, were making reproductions of Chinese furniture because of their love for this traditional, often Ming Dynasty and Qing Dynasty furniture.
I'm going to just jump.
Okay. Marianne's making me jump over this. You could just, describe it.
These are pairs of images. On the left, you see a real fake design by Ai Weiwei. On the right, you see a farmer who noticed how successful these were, and they're building a fake of the fake project. So they're fake fakes or double fakes. And so we've been documenting a whole series of these. It's funny, sometimes they're like right across the street from each other. You'll go like this and like this, just like the photograph, and see these fakes and double fakes. And Ai Weiwei in his work, you know, we won't go into this, but you might want to look into his work. He's always sort of making duplicates of things and reiterations of things, pieces. New ecological orders, artificial nature, naturally artificial, urban afforestation, blah, blah, blah. We'll talk about these.
There are a whole series of conditions existing in China today that go beyond simple issues of environmental contamination or sustainability. These conditions might be described as artificial nature, naturally artificial. As part of the New Socialist Village campaign, but more directly related to the Central Party's mandate for urban afforestation, especially in light of the recent Olympics of August 2008, this is hard to believe, but it's between 3 and 4 billion trees have been planted in Beijing. Mm-hmm. The city is surrounded by tree farms, another reference to the Mao Zedong planning mandate.
40% greenage, right. So afforestation is this word the government uses to counteract this massive deforestation that started during Mao's era. But actually today, it's mostly due, believe it or not, to disposable chopsticks. They're now being made in bamboo. But if you do think one wood and 1.3 million people times 2 chopsticks times 3 meals a day, the math actually really adds up. This is a table made by our students at BASE as part of a set of baseline products. It's 40,000 bamboo chopsticks, renewable bamboo chopsticks. And this is a chopstick steamer stool composed of just over 3,000 chopsticks, enough for a family of 3 meals a day for about half a year.
Deforestation has caused the Gobi Desert to advance toward Beijing at the rate of 1 kilometer per year, producing dunes as high as 30 meters. And this led to spring sandstorms that have become known throughout Asia and beyond as the dreaded 5th season.
Seen in this aerial view.
In order to water the trees, the 3 billion trees, in this desert environment, a contemporary form of engineered rainmaking has been enacted by the Weather Modification Bureau. 70 rockets of silver iodide produce 2 days of rain, providing a good dose of top-down irrigation. When he is not tending the cherry orchards outside Beijing, Yu Yonggang can be found between the twin barrels of a retired 37mm aircraft gun blasting shells of passing clouds. I don't feel like God, he says. I'm just an ordinary worker.
Okay, jump. Okay. And then we were going to talk a little bit about how this is some of the greenery in Caochangdi that was planted. We wanted to also add something about recycling and how, in some sense, nothing is thrown away in China. This is a pair of shoes we made at base from some recycled rice bags and concrete bags, based on the typical 1,000-year sole. Even nails are recycled. In the village, you'll see people yanking nails out and hammering them straight so that they can be reused. The city as open project, open work. So the city of Beijing and the village of Caochangdi are for us open works, open-ended works, and places continually undergoing the processes of making and remaking themselves. We thought it was a real mistake that it was mandated by the government that all the construction sites in Beijing needed to be closed and finished before the Olympics, because what for us, and we know many of the people that love the city, makes the city buzz is the thrill of feeling it being produced around you. The Chinese city is also like Umberto Eco's open work, in which there are deliberate loose ends to allow the public or chance to step in. And for Eco, the open work provides the possibility for elements of multiplicity and plurality, and it produces a more interactive process between reader and text, or in this case, between urbanite and city.
In addition to the ongoing construction, some of the other things that contribute to the legibility of the open project include a changing topography of building materials that fills the streets in a color palette that is unstable and interactive.
So these are these mounds of building materials that form this kind of constantly shifting topography in the city. And then we identified a set of color palettes that, just again to make this story kind of short, that they're incredibly reactive, almost like Joseph Albers' like relativity of color. Colors that have a lot of gray within them so that they become very reactive. And then they're punctuated by the mobile colors of the taxis and vehicles, other mobile elements, or by these artifacts of kind of expendable things of daily life, like plastic buckets and clothing. Maybe we should skip that here.
Oh, you could just maybe, yeah.
Well, the green screen that you saw earlier that wraps the construction sites, for us is a very beautiful sort of deal. And actually later we did hear that Rem Koolhaas fessed up to being influenced by that the kind of scaffolding and the kind of screen, and built that in a way into his finished building. This is a coat that we constructed out of the typical worker's jacket, the Mao Zedong or Sun Yat-sen jacket, but it's composed of that green mesh polypropylene fabric, and one of those is being passed around the audience. We also built one that was 10 times the size so that it became more like a building wrapper. It became a space you could walk into it, you could crawl up in the pocket and perch yourself in it. And then we virtually took it out into the city and sort of tried it on other buildings like this Soviet housing block. So again, while architects seem to be more interested in getting their projects built and finished, although maybe the CCT is an exception, contemporary artists like Lin Yilin find the content of their work actually generated by the open city. Here he moves a wall through the streets amidst construction sites, basically building the wall and then unbuilding it from the back, brick by brick, moving it to the front, blocking traffic as he goes, interrupting the flow of the normal city.
Yeah. Well,
I think we have, the part 2 is much shorter than part 1, but at the same time, and it's also part of the new phase of this work, and I think we had spoken to Mirko and Giovanna about the fact that we'll even do a better version of this text, but that it will be on the website, and that maybe part 2 would be something that you could go and read about. It really looks at the rural side of things. At a certain point, we reached a dead end in looking at Caochangdi and felt like we really needed to know its counterpart in the rural situation, and that's what part 2 is.
And this, but we can say the government mandate to attend to the rural situation was striking, and I think in North America we could have we could make similar statements to maybe the poverty within the cities. But in this case, the leaders came right out and said, "This is what we need to do. We've been building the cities on the backs of the rural situation." There is no possibility to bring, let's say, allow the migration. How do I want to say this? For migration to occur at the rate it has been occurring, because you are going to be building the equivalent of all the American cities, Canadian and in the United States, every 10 years.
To accommodate that growth, I mean, is that possible? Is that even possible?
On top of that, so it's not that you want to keep them down on the farm, but on top of that, the city is not necessarily a great place to be, as we all know.
And we heard from these people.
So there's this second part is about finding ways to take the rural villages, of which there are how many? 300,000 of them. More.
Well, 600,000 people live in the rural villages of China.
600 million.
600 million, and that's double the population of the U.S. right now. So it's
and
a
these
vast
villages
amount of
are generally the size of 200 to 300 people.
like this one.
And in some ways have no future. But our interest in them was to find out what they were about and to see if there were ways to bring life to them, and especially, and in their own words through interviews, they felt this is what they were after as well, especially to bring a kind of cityness to the rural village, so they didn't feel like they were missing out on what they could have. In that New Yorker article on one of these villages, rural villages, the parents, or the writer knew, said, "Yeah, we have the dish, which is illegal, by the way. We have the dish and we can see the TV stations, but what we get, all the stations we get are really shit." That's a quote.
That was from our villagers, actually.
Yeah. And so the project for the rural village and bringing cityness to that, and somehow connecting the rural villages to a larger village, which is somewhat in place, to a satellite city.
And networking that through.
And networking that.
It's something that we're thinking about now. And it parallels the Hu Jintao. We didn't get to do our quote here, but that, also if he's saying, the Chinese government has overlooked the rural population for the urban, maybe architects have as well, because of our fascination for the last, decades with the urban situation. So an open-ended conclusion. There may be certain proximities and simultaneities in space and time between human life and living, various forms of nature and natural production, as in forest, field, agriculture, and animals, and industry, aka factories and sophisticated technologies, from which we have maybe veered off course with new work in city centers and suburbias. As Jane Jacobs has taught us in her book, The Economy of Cities, agriculture is completely dependent upon close proximity with the city. And actually, she argues quite convincingly that the city came first and agriculture came second. So maybe Chairman Mao was onto something. In a China often considered by the West as a kind of monolithic home to conformance, P. Li, we believe, rightly described Caochangdi and places in China like it as birthplaces of entrepreneurship and individualism. This is a slide of a detail of a piece by a Chinese artist, which on the one hand depicts 1,764 of the 1.3 billion individual residents of China. But when you zoom out, and it's hard to see here, but there are portraits of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, formed by these ghost-like portraits are formed by these individuals, this mosaic of individuals.
The Chinese Olympian Li Ning, who is now famous for his feat of gravity defying walk around the rim of the Bird's Nest Stadium to light the torch on 8/8/08, the luckiest day in the century. We also have, which also served as a major bit of global ambush marketing, since in the late 1980s he started his own athletic apparel company. The logo Li Ning, for Li Ning, resembles the Nike swoop, but perhaps with Chinese characteristics.
And on the Wangfujing shopping street, in our first years in China, Nike would be packed with people, the young Chinese. Li Ning was seeing no action. These days it's exactly opposite. These two shops face off on this Wangfujing famous shopping street in Beijing. And we think that perhaps it might be because the youth of China are drawn less toward the call of just do it over here to Li Ning's motto, anything is possible, because in their China, anything is. So in an era that's fundamentally urban, the rural must surely undergo some kind of change. And this change might need to be as radical and ruptured and as fast as the changes that we're seeing in the Chinese city today.
We have a hunch that Caochangdi is a living model and testing ground for experimentation for communal life, be it urban, rural, or something in between, that is tolerant of all kinds of difference and adaptable to the early 20th century conditions in a way that top-down large-scale developments that dominate new and official development are not.
So these rural villagers continue to exist, actually so surprising to us, in the scarcest of resources. Sometimes their income, the average income is something like $100 to $200 a year, and they're 2 hours out of Beijing. But at the same time, this continual buzz, this is a typical night in Caochangdi, as this part of the city labors to build and rebuild their natural village. The photographs and visual information accompanying our words tonight have been produced and collected by us and our students and colleagues. And they're an attempt to look intently at the physical, social, economic, and human contributions to this urbanism growing before our very eyes. We're attempting to capture, understand, learn from, and maybe even export the buzz of this rupture city, this open city, the simultaneous inside-out, natural, workaholic, and adhocratic city that is Caochangdi. And we were going to quote Michel de Certeau here.
To the ordinary man, to the common hero, a ubiquitous character walking in countless thousands of streets, the floodlights have moved away from the actors who possess proper names and social blazons, turning first towards the chorus of secondary characters, then settling on the mass of the audience, a multitude of qualified heroes who lose names and faces as they become the ciphered river of the streets, a mobile language of computations and rationalities that belong to no one.
And we'd like to end by thanking so many of our students and our colleagues for their participation in this work, and thank you also for coming tonight.
Thanks. That was an incredibly compelling portrait. I found it really fascinating. I had a question actually about, so the picture that you've presented is of this, sort of amazing whole that seems to, that works amidst all this, this kaleidoscope of appropriations on this sort of very broad range. And I'm curious about sort of any emerging social tensions amidst this this portrait, and in particular any sort of any tensions between this this international art sort of scene that's woven itself through this this village and others in the village, because presumably this would be a scene that sort of connects some to this very sort of profitable, this profitable network and not others. And I'm curious of sort of whether there are any kind of fault lines in terms of social tension emerging alongside of this.
Boy, I have to say, you know, we really romanticize, I'm sure, all of our experiences in China. And this goes way back for me to the 60s. But you know, you don't sense any of that in Caochangdi. We haven't heard a peep of any kind of problematic at that level.
What's focused on when we bring up with the villagers, the cultural people, is that they're so happy that they're there because the economy, you know, what you said, the economy of the village is growing, and it's sort of so appreciated. The other thing, we mentioned briefly that democracy is operational at the village level in China, not above that, but rural and urban villages. And you know, we live in a district in Los Angeles that's the kind of loft produce district. And when we need to call our city council office with some problem, prostitution, drugs, garbage on the streets, you know, open sewers, you know, no toilets for the homeless, so everything's everywhere and going down the storm sewers. We can't even get through to them. And one thing we have found in these villages is that there's a direct, that they're elected officials, and there's some stuff that goes on there, like not just anybody can be put in a position to be elected, but they are elected, and they are people that can be gone to, and the whole village can gang up on their village leader if they want to. And so there is some recourse for voice. You know, if tensions are starting to build at that level, I think China has put in place something, you know, that maybe it dissolves it before it should. I don't know, but it's one of the things at play.
I mean, it's, that situation of the disparity of the kinds of people that are there. It's not just the art thing up here and the people, the farmers that lived there before. It's also the taxi driver crowd, which is a totally alien thing because they're not native to the area either. And what else would you say?
Well, and Xiaoliu, the construction worker who's worked for these artists and is now kind of wealthier than a lot of those artists he's working for. So it is a kind of mixed, you know, very mixed.
And they all coexist. It should be a kind of model for what we aspire to in cities.
More questions?
The documentation that you carried out is quite, there's a lot of breadth and a lot of depth. And what I want to know is what is a motive for taking it forward? What is a way to think about how that can be incorporated into other informal settlements that, as you say, are, you know, a third of the world's population?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think we're on the same side of the table as
Robert Neuwirth.
Robert Neuwirth
In
is
the
that
Shadow Cities.
the more that, this work will be published this coming spring, that the more that these kinds of materials can be put forth, especially then be viewed by the powers to be, the more that they might, you know, say, it won't just be under the radar. They'll say, hey, this is not necessarily a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. The three most successful kind of areas, maybe in Beijing, Caochangdi is sort of the minor one in a certain way, but the 798's Art District and the Hohai River area were all, they're just sort of ground up things, you know, from the ground up, and, you know, sort of that the government let them evolve on their own. This is what Robert Neuwirth says, that government should empower people and even support the people of the neighborhoods themselves to build their own cities, would be one of the biggest probably things that we have.
The 798 district, many of you probably know some of the images from this and know about it. When we first made our appearance there in 2003 and 2004, it was really slated to be demolished by the owners of this area, the Seven Star Group, which is owned by Beijing Oriental Electronics, which is owned by the Army.
But during the Olympics, it was the only site that 70 to 80 world leaders visited. It was like the thing on their agenda. So it sort of went from that to that.
At some point, and a lot of, there were artists and various people did did whatever was necessary to try to prevent that thing from being taken down. And the people that controlled the buildings had a problem on their hands, which were the pensions for the workers that were now out of work, but largely retired. And they thought if they could develop the area, they could then make money on that development and you know, take care of that. But somehow that area was saved. The government really, the central government really stepped in at some point and said, look, I think their motive was, hey, this is an area, because we're hearing it off to the side, that people say, hey, China is not oppressive. There's a kind of free atmosphere in this area, and we should somehow maintain it and sustain it. That became, that idea of that creative zone became a kind of principle in this last 5-year plan.
And I'd just quickly add, too, that some of the little lessons, like even the color palette issue, taught us things about architecture. You know, sometimes there are little lessons, or how do you produce an open city, that some of those insights, at least for us, we would take with us.
And again, the more that things like this can be set before the people that make the laws and carry out all the edicts of the building codes, et cetera, for this humongous amount of immigration into cities. We have the same thing in Los Angeles. I have maybe a third of Los Angeles or a quarter of Los Angeles are either recent migrants to the city or illegal migrants.
It's one of the
to
largest
city.
third world cities in the country. It's literally considered a third world city.
And looking the other way often, as opposed to punishment, is not a bad thing for the city to sort of grow itself.
That was a fascinating presentation. I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the banner that we see on the stage here.
Those are some of Chairman Mao's words, but you know, if you saw in the village is covered with these slogan banners. And actually there are also most of the intersection speakers, and they actually stopped doing this in the last 1 or 2 years, but there would be announcements about to be a good citizen, to help green our capital, help work together, you know, to build the new socialist village. And it was sort of the government speaking to the people on the street, and you know, it's just another aspect.
The city government of Caochangdi.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. But there was one that was about build.
Well, yes.
Make
So one of them, we didn't get around to saying this, but there was a translation of one that was almost like the voice of the government egging on the village to build itself, which was Robert Neuwirth's proposal. You know, that we must work together to build our own new socialist village. So once they sort of realized that the villagers and the artists could do it, the voice was, you know, kind of egging on in a way.
Thank you very much. I think that at the London School of Economics, you are going to go through a real tour de force of questions about social and political situation. And I like to get back the fake thing that is moving around here in the theater. And I would like also to thank you for these wonderful tables. I think that from now on we are going to use that. Thank you again, and thank you to you, all of you, for the presence tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.